Hey guys, Spirit of the Law here. We've had some huge announcements come out today for Age of Empires 2, giving us an early look at what's coming up in the next few weeks. It's way more than I ever would have expected to come out this entire year, including massive balance changes, the most dramatic UI improvements since Definitive Edition, unique castles for every civilization, the coolest looking unit just got even cooler, we have major shakeups for popular maps, and then some big reveals about the next DLC having 5 new civilizations. So let's take a look at everything we know so far. It's impossible to cover everything in this in under an hour, but just to highlight some of the attention to detail, I love things like this small UI change, where monks you send to pick up a relic aren't grabbed by the select all military units hotkey anymore. It's one of those tiny things I just love they're getting around to. But let's get into the bigger news. The first one is there's going to be a unique castle visual for every civilization, and as far as I can tell, this isn't a DLC, which is kind of crazy. There's 25 brand new ones they had to make, and they've given a bit of a challenge for players to try to figure out which ones these are. Likewise, elite units are now going to have different visuals from non-elite ones, and the differences really aren't subtle, making it very easy to tell what upgrade your opponent has. Teutonic Knights in particular get slick helmets, Samurai get a banner, and Janissaries finally get their hats. It's an awesome change, especially when you consider every unit has to be shot from 16 different angles and have so many frames for each attack, standing, and fighting animations. So the game's definitely going to be bigger to download, but it's a huge undertaking and something I honestly never thought we'd see. The shorthand seems to be if the unit has gold on it, then it's very likely their elite version. Similarly, we're also getting 6 new monk skins, depending on the civilization, and 3 new monasteries. I feel like mods have been doing this kind of thing for a long time, but I love that it's finally official. Part of me still feels like this has to be a paid DLC, but I didn't notice anything about that in the announcement, so there you go. All monks are also going to have a separate conversion animation to healing, so instead of one type of hand waving, I guess they're going to have 2 going forward. Another change I never thought would happen is they're putting attention into animation attack synchronization. For so long, units would attack and damage would just show up randomly, but someone crunched the numbers on animation speed and got those synced up with how they look and sound. Important to note is that damage being done is the same as before, it's just the visuals that are being synced up. In a similar vein, we're getting more variety of attack animations for a large number of infantry, so presumably they rotate between a few different looking attacks instead of swinging their sword the same way every time. It's not one of those things Age of Empires necessarily needed, but it's still a great change to make battles look more interesting and less cartoony. We're still not even into the balance changes and new DLC stuff either. This is all graphics and UI stuff so far. Next, they're reorganizing the tech tree to be a bit more condensed, and in their screenshot of that, preview one of the new civs with a Fire Lancer at the barracks and early access to Heavy Cavalry Archer and Age Early. This is a pretty interesting tech tree shown, as they're very Cavalry and Cavalry Archer focused, but missing bloodlines, and who knows, maybe some blacksmith techs as well. Notice the more purplish blue color also shows regional units more clearly at a glance, just to make interpretation even easier, which is great especially with all the new regional units coming, which we'll talk about a bit later. Another major UI change is now hovering your mouse over unit stats will show their attack bonuses. We see a new Fire Archer unit stats here as an example, which is possibly a unique unit, but theoretically could be from the scenario editor. It seems to be an anti-ship and anti-building archer, but either way, the UI change itself is going to be really nice in those moments you can't remember what bonuses a unique unit has, though I have to feel like the devs are putting me out of a job here. And speaking of armor bonuses, the Eagle Warrior is now being moved into a new armor class, renamed Shock Infantry, being shared with a few other units. Presumably, this is still something the Swordsman line and many other infantry are going to have a bonus against. There's also some new map changes, with 3 new random maps and 7 quick start maps, where you start with an extra 6 villagers. Some changes to existing maps are also going to be pretty substantial in some cases, and with Arabia for example, there's a long list of tweaks, including forests being made larger and in some cases slightly closer, more consistent generation, and deer can now spawn in groups of 2 or 4 instead of just 3. That obviously isn't exhaustive, and for another example, on Arena there's a 50% chance that regular huntable animals are being replaced by unpushable huntable animals. This is actually a new type of animal that you have to mill, and it's the chicken. Basically, you can't herd them like sheep, and you can't push them like deer. They just stay in one spot, so you actually have to mill them to get food from them efficiently. I like the idea of bringing back milling, which has otherwise been replaced by pushing deer for the most part, and we also get 3 new predator animals, though I suspect they won't be any different to existing ones in the game besides visuals. Also, of course, it's another patch, which means another promise of better pathfinding. I like that they're still trying, and I hope everyone agrees this makes things better instead of introducing new bugs. And who knows, maybe this is the one that it all comes together and players are all happy with pathing. Now, if all those reskins, map changes, animals, and UI overhauls weren't enough, now let's get down to the balance changes. This patch is right up there with some of the biggest ones we've ever had in this regard. To start generally, there's a few ones to rattle off, like the Elite Step Lancer upgrade and Elephant Archer costs being swapped around a bit. The base speed of trade carts and cogs is also going up, but end up the same after Caravan, which now has a smaller effect. Big ones to note are transport ship garrison space is going up from 5 to now 20 by default, cavalry archers are going to take longer to train, town centers garrisoned by villagers no longer fire fewer arrows after range attack upgrades, and mangonels deal 1 less damage to monks. They specifically mention this will help monks survive a direct shot from a mangonel if the monk has sanctity. And I'm not downplaying any of these changes, there's just a lot to take in, so we won't get hung up on anything in particular here if we can help it. Next is a massive infantry overhaul. First, supplies is gone. The militia line's cost drops by 10 food, they're sped up by 7% to match archers, two-handed swordsman is cheaper and faster to research with then more HP, while the champion upgrade is a bit cheaper and faster with +1 attack. It's not quite the Battle for Greece treatment streamlining the unit, but this directly addresses their weakness from being slow and how long it takes a tech into champion. The 50 food cost is also interesting, as it was technically cheaper to make them before if you had supplies, and supplies was previously used to balance around civ bonuses and push civs toward or away from infantry, but it makes sense that it's just a better unit line now, and they want to see more of it. Arson was also made cheaper and moved to feudal age, so you can start pressuring buildings earlier with your men-at-arms. Eagle Scouts are also a little faster to train, so maybe we see more feudal age Eagle Scout rushes, though 50 seconds is still a long time to make. For reference, they still become just 35 seconds to train once you reach Castle Age. Next up though, let's take a look at these civilization-specific changes. The first is for the Aztecs, whose Jaguar Warriors' attack is increasing dramatically, with their bonus against infantry being reduced. They also have a new ability of gaining +1 attack when defeating a military unit up to +4, I assume in reference to the Garland Wars and Aztecs becoming Jaguar Warriors by capturing 4 enemy prisoners. It's a cool historical reference, and greatly helps an overly specialized unit, so we'll see how it plays out. Next up, Bengalis and Bulgarians have a couple of small changes, with the Wrath HP reduced slightly and its training time increased, while the non-elite Conic has 1 more Pierce armor in both its mounted and dismounted version from how I'm reading this. Moving on to Burgundians, they're currently doing quite poorly on the ladder, and were actually at the bottom last time I checked, but are getting a brand new bonus where they can train Flemish militia at the barracks starting in feudal age, with a cost of 30 food and 30 gold. It sounds like they're going to count as a spearman class unit, so they're going to take a bit of extra bonus damage and seem to automatically improve its stats as you age up. Their stats seem similar or maybe slightly worse than the swordsman line, with an anti-cavalry bonus, albeit taking extra bonus damage from archers and skirmishers. Moving on to the Celts, their speed bonus is going from +15% starting in feudal to now a staggered 5, 10, 15, 20% as you age up, meaning their militia are now going to benefit slightly and their top end is also slightly higher. Bold Raider is then going up by 5 food in cost to now 70 food and slowing down slightly in Castle Age, but it's now overall a little faster in Imperial Age, plus the elite version is getting an extra attack. They're just basically a better, slightly more expensive version in Imperial Age, doubling down on its existing advantages of high speed and attack, probably just to help it not get completely outshined by the improved swordsman line. Next up for the Chinese, they're getting a massive update on top of what sounds like 5 brand new civilizations in the DLC. First, they have 4 new units, the Fire Lancer at the barracks, rocket carts, or basically nested bees to replace the mangonel, and 2 unique water units. The fact only one of these is mentioned as unique upgrade, and they still have the Chukanu, makes me think the first 3 are going to be regional units for the new civs and Chinese. For new bonuses, they're getting faster moving Fire Lancers and Fire Ships to lose their 50% Demo Ship HP bonus. The Fire Lancer seems from the earliest screenshots like they deal charge attacks and then look a lot like pikemen, but don't actually replace them, so we'll see how they play out. The Elite Chukanu is also having its attack increase from 8 to 10, essentially having rocketry baked into the Elite upgrade, with a more expensive upgrade to compensate. Rocketry for its part is then being repurposed to give Scorpions, rocket carts, and the new naval unit Lu Chuans plus 25% attack, and giving that unit fire rockets. Chinese also then lose camels, mangonels, and cannon galleons, So it sounds like the rocket carts are a mangonel replacement, and the Luchuan is possibly a cannon galleon equivalent, like the Droman, with Chinese in general going heavily into archers and gunpowder. Next up, for the Dravidians, the Arumi Swordsman is just getting a slight attack increase, as a common theme for infantry throughout this. They're also going to move slightly faster, and Dravidians get Husbandry to help out their very weak stable. Moving on, Georgians are then going to have their cavalry regeneration bonus dialed back, especially in the early game. It's been interesting seeing all the complaints about Georgians in the comments focusing on the Manaspa, when if you look at the stats, it's really the early game Scout Rush that's OP if anything. So I like the devs are being data instead of sentiment driven in this change. That's not to say they can't tweak the Manaspa later, but I think this better addresses why they're top 10 on Arabia at the moment. Next up for the Goths, the Elite Huskarl's base cost is going down and their training time is speeding up, though to offset that, their infantry discount is being toned down by 5%. It's always a little confusing when you have numbers going up and down at the same time like this, but it seems like the net result is they just cost 2 gold less in Castle and Imperial Age. The main thing is since supplies is baked into the Swordsman line's cost, this somewhat offsets that, since their discount won't be as large anymore. But net of all the changes, Goths seem to be in a slightly better position with their infantry than before, except in the cost of the spear line. Moving on to the Huns, the Tarkin is going to attack slightly faster. Not much to say about this one, other than hopefully they remembered to get the animation in sync as well. Next up for Italians, Pavese giving +1/+1 armor to archers and condottieri is being removed, and just being given as a free civ bonus. Silk Road is then being moved down to Castle Age for a cheaper cost, and they have a new unique tech, giving hand cannoneers pass-through damage while also being more accurate. I really like seeing a straight buff to Italians, who were struggling on land maps in particular, whereas now even in Feudal Age, their archers will have +1/+1 armor. Moving on to Japanese, in addition to the visual upgrade of the Elite Samurai, the Samurai is now going to be cheaper, presumably to keep pace with Swordsmen. Samurai are also getting a new ability with additional movement speed and +1 attack when charging an enemy unit. Do they keep the +1 attack during the fight? I'm not sure, but since they're getting a cool Elite version reskin, I'm really hoping we see more of it. Their team bonus is also being slightly reworked from +50% line of sight on galleys to +4 line of sight, which is actually a slight nerf when you consider that the galleon has 9 line of sight by default. Next up, for the Khmer, the Ballista Elephant attack is being reduced by 1, which probably has something to do with their recent change letting those be affected by ballistics. Moving on to Koreans, they're getting a massive update as well to their units and bonuses. First, they're getting the Fire Lancer and Rocket Cart as regional units, losing the Mangonel line entirely, which seems like a pretty wild change from being the OP Siege Onager Civ back in the day. Their reduced minimum range for the Mangonel line team bonus is now Villagers +3 line of sight, which is going to be crazy on Nomad. The War Wagon then loses some of its bonus against buildings, the turtle ship now fires 2 volleys of rockets between cannon shots, and has just a huge overhaul of their stats. It's hard to look at it and know where this is going to land, as naval units have a lot of hidden bonus damage that dictates how they match up, but I'm looking forward to giving this a deep dive. The unique tech giving their Mangonel line +1 range is then +1 range and extra rockets for their rocket carts and turtle ships. From a historical perspective, I love the shakeup, as they're finally going to be the Huacha civilization that everyone always wanted, and it'll be very interesting to test some of this out when it's available. Next up for the Portuguese, the Organ Gun is going to lose some HP, which is presumably just the non-elite version as I'm reading this, and is probably to try to slow down their Castle Age push. Moving on to Sicilians, the Sergeant is now going up in price, is slightly faster, and having its armor rejigged to have more melee armor from Castle Age onward, but less Pierce armor in all ages, making archers and defensive buildings a better counter. On the flip side, donjons can now be built in Dark Age, which sounds like it's just going to make even more donjon rush shenanigans, but the devs note it's about using the donjon to unlock archery ranges and stables earlier. It's a bold change, and I'm a little nervous to see how people are going to feel about donjons and their woodlines before the opponent has even hit Feudal Age, but we'll see how it plays out. Next up for the Slavs, their free supplies bonus is being changed to free arson, and remember this is in Feudal Age, so a Slav men-at-arm rush is definitely on the menu. Moving on to the Teutons, the Elite Teutonic Knight is now going to have more HP and conversion resistance, on top of their team bonus staying the same. I love that instead of a speed increase like most unique infantry units, they're just getting more conversion resistance. And I mean, it kind of makes sense. Good luck converting a crusader to your religion. Maybe just make them impervious to conversion while you're at it. And finally, Spanish, Vietnamese, and Vikings have a few small changes to their missionary, Vietnamese getting the Fire Lancer with 20% more HP, and the Berserk is having its gold cost drop by 5. So those are the balance changes. And as for the upcoming news, beyond the glimpses of tech trees we got, they announced the next expansion will have 5 brand new civilizations, all playable in ranked multiplayer. This doesn't seem to include Chinese, though I suppose it's possible they're being renamed and included in the list, but that's not how I read it. Remember, Dynasties of India had 3.5, and this is either 4.5 or 5.5, depending on how they're counting Chinese, and we could almost count Koreans as a half new civ as well. Mid-April is when this is all coming out, and it's not an exaggeration to say this is shaping up to be simultaneously the biggest patch and biggest DLC since the Conquerors back in 2000. Everything about this is bold, and I'm looking forward to it, but let me know what you guys think. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.